Cloudy days have the most boring and flat light for street and travel photography, but with the right methods, you can get amazing photos even on cloudy days. Because let's face it, sometimes we just don't have a choice because we may be traveling to a location that we only get to see once in a lifetime, and not taking photos is not an option. So in this video, I'm going to share 4 tips and 8 methods that you can apply right after watching this video to get amazing photos even on cloudy days. And the last one will help you get amazing light even on cloudy days with no sunlight without using any extra gear. So let's start with the first one. The first tip is to create contrast, because essentially on cloudy days, that is exactly what we are missing, because the flat light makes everything kind of evenly lit, and that's a disadvantage because that makes it really hard to understand what the photo is about and to see what in the photo we are meant to look at. So by creating contrast, we can help our viewer understand what we want them to look at. So in this example, it's fairly obvious. So the contrast between the bright sky and the rest of the composition, which is rather dark, is exactly what we want to create. So what you can do is contrast your subject, if it's very dark, like the silhouette of this bird, with a bright sky. So basically shooting into the sky if your subject is in the sky. Or if your subject is on the ground, you can shoot into a bright backdrop, but we'll get to that in a minute. So in this case, we have the contrast between the bird and the sky, and we have this kind of frame, which helps us point the viewer towards our subject, because the frame of this opening in the building kind of establishes a point of interest that tells our viewer where to look at. And the thing about contrast is that we usually notice points with the highest contrast first. And I say usually because of this next example, because in this example, we do have a point of very high contrast, and that is this woman on the left. And I feel like she has the highest contrast compared to this bright background. But the thing is, in this case, the man on the right still is more interesting and more noticeable because he has more details on him. So usually the point with the highest contrast is where we look at first. But if there's something else with contrast and more details in it, because on the left we only have a silhouette, if there's something else with enough contrast and more details, that's what we are going to notice first. So in this case, the gentleman on the right who just walks out of the shadow creates the highest point of interest because the contrast with the bright background is high enough, and also the light kind of falls off on him very nicely. So if we start from the top left of his shoulder, that's very bright, and then it gets darker and darker until we get to the bottom of his feet, essentially, where it's really, really dark. And this contrast on the subject itself creates a point of interest and makes it really easy to notice compared to a silhouette, which has no detail and is really hard to examine for the viewer because we see it's a black silhouette and that's essentially all we get. So the key here is, if you are photographing people, to photograph them at the point when they are stepping out of the light. This is just very helpful to create more details and contrast at the same time, and it's just a very nice look that I like to go for. And also, if you're enjoying this video, I would appreciate it if you liked it, if you left a comment, and if you subscribed, because I'm a very small channel and this just helps me understand whether anything I'm saying is actually helpful, and it kind of helps me make more of these videos and kind of understand if this type of video is something that actually helps people, because that's what these are for. So the next tip I have for you is simplify your composition. And there's a couple of ways in which you can do that. So one thing is using leading lines, as in this case, because in this photo there is not too much contrast if you look at it. We have a little bit of contrast on the top right where our subject's upper body is. It contrasts, wow, can't speak suddenly. It contrasts very well with the background, but the lower body doesn't have too much contrast, to be fair. And in this case, these leading lines, these kind of rails, they lead toward the subject. So we are making up the lack of contrast in the lower body of our subject with visual cues. So using leading lines, for example, that lead us toward the subject, we can make up for the lack of contrast. Another thing you can use is frames, because honestly, in this photo, there is not too much to look at. We have Mount Fuji that we are seeing through the window of a bus, and everything else is just kind of dark and not really noticeable. So the key here is to find a frame that blocks out any distractions, as in this case, anything else that would have been on the right or the left, and we frame our subject within that frame, because that tells our viewer where to look to understand the photo. And bonus tip for frames: if you can find something that is noticeable, like this seat of the bus on the right side, that's very helpful, and it helps you create a context. So this frame is not just a means to an end to somehow frame Mount Fuji, is also meant to tell you about where I took this photo from inside a moving bus. And that's just a really helpful way to kind of underline the story of this shot, which is a bus ride around Mount Fuji. Okay, another thing you can do is use foreground, as in this case, and this does a couple of things. So for one, it helps us again block out distractions. So I was able to block out the people on the left side of this road that were coming towards me, because if I had them in the shot, it would have been really hard to understand who this photo was about, which is about this lady moving away from the camera. Or not about this lady specifically, just about someone walking down the street. But having an isolated subject is just a way to make your composition way easier to understand and keep it cleaner. And also, this foreground creates a bit of depth because it's so close to the camera. We can tell that our subject is further away from the camera. And this, makes your image feel a little more three-dimensional. And all that despite having no interesting light that kind of helps us highlight our subject. So keep that in mind. All these things together can help you, even if you don't have any amazing light. Okay, another thing you can do is overexpose the sky. And I don't mean overexpose as in having it completely white, but just shy of being completely white. Because if the sky is very gray, as you can see on the right side, it doesn't look very appealing. It's dull, it's very gray, but at the same time, it has enough detail to be distracting from our subject, because this texture in the clouds is just kind of distracting, and it demands attention, and we don't want this attention on the clouds. So by overexposing the sky, we get rid of these distractions, and we make our composition easier to understand because we are removing one distraction. This helps us hold the focus toward our subject, which is this canal and the buildings that just look kind of interesting. Okay, lastly, when it comes to visual cues, we have using negative space. So in this case, I know I just mentioned overexpose the sky, but in this case, I felt like I didn't have to overexpose it, because this time there's no texture in the sky, so it's actually just one gray piece of nothingness. So overexposing the sky just didn't feel quite right, and I didn't need to because there were no distracting elements there. And secondly, there's just almost nothing in this photo. Basically, we have these two guys on opposite sides, and they contrast each other. One is wearing a suit, one looks like a free spirit, and these characters themselves, they just make the story of this photo, and they are just very contrasting, and that's basically it. So using negative space, meaning just empty space around your subject, to simplify your composition, so having less distracting things, and letting your subject basically do the talking, is a great way to simplify your composition and make it easier to understand. And I do have 2 whole videos about these different visual elements that I'll link in the description. So if you want a deeper dive on any of these, just check out the 2 videos right after this video. Okay, another thing you can do is focus on color, because color helps you break this monotonous feeling of cloudy days, because on cloudy days things tend to have very flat colors, and also it always looks like a very analogous color palette. Depending on where you are, if you're in the city, you will know that everything just looks kind of gray. So by having lights, for example, with a warm color, you can contrast this warm color with the gray or bluish colors of the concrete within the city, and this kind of breathes life into your composition. It automatically introduces a kind of visual interest because we suddenly have a different color, and it just shakes things up in a very good way, and not just for the sake of shaking things up, but it also kind of introduces a feeling of warmth that we sometimes need because these gray photos tend to look very cold. It just demands so much attention that the clouds in the sky really aren't that interesting. And the greens and these oranges, they just kind of pop automatically compared to these grayish, brownish tones on the ground, and even with the blue grayish kind of nothingness in the sky. Okay, one last example for color. To be fair, I don't have too much to say about this photo. I kind of liked it. I liked the color of these bags and the color of this guy's shirt, and I really just liked the composition. That is all. But I still figured I would share it because I personally feel like it's very helpful for me if I see example photos for situations in which I am going to shoot. So yeah, I hope this just helps you to find kind of different locations in which you can shoot during cloudy days. Like train stations are obviously one of my favorites that kind of create a natural contrast. And yeah, the color here is a nice pop. Okay, last tip. I rarely hear anyone talk about this, but I feel like I talk about it a lot on this channel, and that is shaping the light. And this is not just about creating contrast, but it's about deciding how the light falls into our composition. And the idea here is to find something that blocks the light, but unlike when creating contrast, so if you think about the images I showed you initially in the first couple of minutes of the video, they were about having very clean edges between shadows and highlights. In this case, when it comes to shaping light, it's really about creating a kind of fall off. So we are creating different shades of light and different shades of dark. And what this does is, for one, it creates a more harmonious look because of these very clean edges between bright and dark. They tend to look very sharp, and that's a look you can go for, and I personally like it. But I'm just saying shaping the light in this way just feels more harmonious because you get a much softer difference between light and dark, basically. So a way to shape the light is to, as I mentioned, find things that block the light only in some parts of your image and have an opening that allows your light to fall into the composition. So to basically shoot at an shoot at an angle towards the opening. So don't stand right in front of the opening, but turn yourself a little to the side so the light has a chance to fall in and create this fall off. And this helps us create contrast and have a spot of light, basically, where we want our subject to be. Okay, another example, this is the last one, is this one, where we have very dark areas like the roof of this bridge or the bottom of this bridge, but for us it's the roof. And we see that from the right, the light comes in, and if we move our eyes from the right, very bright side to the left, you'll notice that there's a kind of gradient that goes from bright to dark. So shaping the light, again, is just a way to create a more harmonious, more natural type of contrast that is a little bit softer and creates more of a flow because it leads into the photo. Okay, this is it for today's video. If you liked this video, I would appreciate it if you liked the video, subscribed, and commented if you have any questions about what I just said or any thoughts in general about what I just mentioned. And other than that, I hope this video helps you create with more intention, and I'll see you next Wednesday.